My name is Eve Kerwin, and what I'm about to share is not easy to explain. I never thought that a simple Sunday could change everything. It was a quiet morning, like so many others. I woke up early, had breakfast, and headed to church, as I did every week. I've always enjoyed that silence before the service began, the moment when I could talk with God without hurry, without distractions. I knelt on the same bench as always, closed my eyes, and began to pray. But that day, something different happened. An intense heat rose in my chest as if something were squeezing my heart. My vision suddenly darkened, and a loud buzzing filled my ears. My body went limp, and before I could understand what was happening, everything around me vanished. The last thing I remember of the physical world was the sensation of falling even though I was kneeling. After that, there was only an absolute void, no pain, no sound, no sense of time, just nothing. For a moment, I thought I had fainted, but then, something changed. A light appeared before me, not like a lamp or the sun, but a living, intense, welcoming presence. I remained motionless, unsure whether I should be afraid or surrender to it. And then, something happened that made my heart race. I heard my name being called. It wasn't an ordinary sound. It was something that vibrated inside me, as if every part of my being recognized that voice. I stayed there, floating in that void for a time I couldn't measure. There was no fear or anxiety, only a calm I had never felt before. But that voice calling my name, that was different. It wasn't just a sound. It was as if every cell in my body was being summoned. Suddenly, an invisible force pulled me toward the light. In the moment I was enveloped by it, something inside me broke, as if the entire weight of the world, all worries, all the fear I hadn't even known I carried, simply vanished. I no longer felt my body as I once did, yet my consciousness was more awake than ever. And then I realized I was no longer in the church nor in the world I knew. I had crossed over to another place. What I saw next is something that words cannot fully describe. Before me, a scene of indescribable beauty unfolded. It wasn't like the images I had in my mind of heaven, not clouds or angels playing harps. It was an expanse of living light, something that not only illuminated but conveyed a presence. The very air seemed to vibrate with peace and love, as if I were inside a silent melody. I walked without knowing exactly how, for I did not feel the ground beneath my feet, yet I moved as if being guided. And then, on the golden horizon, I saw a figure approaching. In that instant, I knew, without anyone needing to tell me, who it was. There was no doubt within me. I knew exactly who was before me, even though I had never seen him with my earthly eyes. His presence was overwhelming, yet at the same time, enveloping, welcoming. He wasn't just a figure of light, nor merely a vision. It was a reality more intense and true than anything I had ever experienced. He didn't need to say anything for me to understand that I was in the presence of Jesus. As soon as I approached, an indescribable feeling took hold of me. It was as if my entire life were being laid bare, not in an accusatory way, but as a pure and irrefutable truth. He looked at me and, without moving his lips or needing words, made me feel the totality of his love. It was at that moment that I realized something strange. I no longer felt any pain, no remorse, no shadow of doubt or fear. It was as if, throughout my entire existence, I had been waiting for that moment. Then, he spoke, not with ordinary words, not like we speak to one another. His voice was like a stream of energy, something that echoed within me, filling every space of my being. Eve, there is something you need to see. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The very moment he said that, everything around me transformed. The radiant landscape disappeared, and I was overcome by a sensation of movement, as if I were being pulled into something greater than I could comprehend. I wasn't afraid, for his presence was still with me, but I knew I was about to witness something that would change everything. What came next was something that no words can accurately describe. In the blink of an eye, I was no longer in that place of light and peace. I was transported to a vision so vivid, it felt as if I were experiencing it in real time. Before me, I saw the world I knew, but something was different. The cities were covered by a somber atmosphere, not from a lack of sunlight, but by something deeper, as if an invisible weight oppressed everything and everyone. There was a strange silence in the air, yet at the same time I could hear murmurs, whispers filled with despair. The streets seemed normal at first glance, but when I looked at the people, I noticed what was wrong. It wasn't just fear in their eyes. It was a void, as if something essential had been ripped from within them. I walked through that scene, not fully understanding what I was seeing, until I noticed something even more disturbing. On the buildings, in the stores, even on the documents that people held, there was a symbol I had never seen before, yet somehow I knew what it meant. It was a mark, a sign of belonging to something much greater than any government or human organization. Jesus didn't need to explain. It deep down, I already understood what I was witnessing. That mark wasn't just a code or an identity document. It was a seal of submission. Those who bore that symbol seemed calm, but that calm was false, empty. And those who did not have it, I saw the panic in their eyes. I saw how they were avoided, persecuted, as if they were criminals simply for existing. I continued watching, trying to absorb it all. People without the mark were prevented from entering markets, stores, and even hospitals. I saw a desperate woman pleading for food for her small child, but the market employees simply ignored her. Her look was one of pure despair, a suffering that went beyond hunger. It was the pain of knowing there was no way out. And then, something caught my attention. Some of those without the mark hid, moving discreetly in the shadows as if they knew they were being hunted. And they were. In an instant, I saw uniformed agents appear, scanning people, looking for those who were not registered in the system. When they found someone, without the mark, there was no discussion, no negotiation. They were taken by force, and I didn't need to see what happened next to know that their fate was no good. Jesus remained by my side the whole time, and despite everything I saw, his presence was the only thing that kept me from being consumed by fear. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt something different in his gaze. Not just love, but a deep sadness. This will come, and many will not be prepared. His voice echoed within me. At that very moment, the vision changed. I was taken to a different place, a kind of open field where a group of people was gathered. They had no temples, no luxuries, only an unshakable faith. I saw how they shared the little they had, how they prayed together, how they protected one another. And then I understood. These were the ones who had chosen not to submit. They were suffering, living on the fringes of society. But there was something in them that set them apart from everyone else, a peace that the world could not steal. I watched that group for a while, trying to understand how they managed to survive in the face of so much adversity. They had no access to markets, jobs, or hospitals. They were like ghosts, living in secret, depending on each other. But what impressed me was not only their courage, it was what happened next. I saw a family kneeling around an empty table, praying fervently, with a faith I had never witnessed before. They were not asking for riches, comfort, or security. They simply trusted. And then, before my eyes, I saw something impossible happen. Food appeared on the table. Bread, fruits, water. It came from no human source. No one brought or delivered it. It was simply there. And it wasn't a trick. It wasn't an illusion. Those people were being sustained by something that the world had long forgotten, the direct provision of God. The vision continued unfolding before me. I saw the sick being healed without medicine, saw sources of water, springing from dry ground where there had once been nothing. I saw how, despite the persecution, those who remained faithful were being cared for by something greater than any human system. It wasn't an easy path. They went through hunger, cold, fear. But the difference between them and those who had accepted the mark was clear. They still had something that others had lost, the presence of God. It was in that moment that I understood the true purpose of that vision. It wasn't just a warning about what was to come, but a revelation about the choice each one would have to make. And that choice would not be merely about comfort or suffering, but about faith and surrender. Then, I was taken to another scene. It was a large urban center, a modern place, well lit, where everything seemed to operate in perfect order. But there was something unsettling in that environment. People walked as if in a trance, all following a programmed rhythm, without questioning, without showing deep emotions. It was an artificial peace, a balance that seemed good at first glance but that concealed something terrible. I looked around and realized that no one talked about faith or God anymore. Churches had been transformed into neutral community centers where only messages of unity and progress were allowed. True worship had been silenced, replaced by a system that promised stability, but at the cost of spiritual freedom. I saw how those who questioned or showed any resistance were discreetly removed without fanfare. There wasn't overt violence, but rather subtle control, a manipulation so well constructed that most didn't even realize they were being led. Those who accepted the mark lived without apparent worries, with access to everything they needed. But I could see beyond the surface. I saw the eyes of these people, and what I saw was emptiness. There was no life, no light. It was as if something essential had been removed from them. I looked at Jesus by my side and felt a weight in my heart. What I was seeing was not just an oppressive government or a controlling system. It was the great illusion, the lie that would make the world believe it was safe, when in reality, it was farther from God than ever. While I absorbed it all, a new scene formed before me. I saw a huge event being broadcast to the entire world. Charismatic leaders spoke to crowds, preaching a time of unity, peace, and progress. People applauded them enthusiastically, as if they were enchanted. There was an atmosphere of euphoria in the air, a sense of renewed hope. But beneath that harmonious facade, something was terribly wrong. The words were beautiful, well-structured, but empty of truth. They spoke of a world without divisions, without conflicts, without the need for ancient beliefs that separated people. I saw how traditional religious symbols had been removed from plazas, schools, and homes. The faith as I knew it had been replaced by something diluted, controlled, standardized. Everything seemed perfect, but I knew that this was the preparation for something much worse. Then I realized the trap. They weren't just promoting peace. They were molding humanity to accept what would come next. And what would come next would be the final demand, the mark. At first, it was merely a way to facilitate life, to maintain order, to ensure that no one would go without. But gradually, it became mandatory. Those who did not accept it were excluded, considered a threat to the collective well-being. I saw people being taken away, their homes seized, their bank accounts frozen. It was total control. And the worst part was that most accepted it without hesitation, without realizing they were giving away something they would never recover. And those who resisted were few, very few. My vision expanded, and I was taken to a place that looked like a large underground facility. There were organized lines, people waiting patiently, while screens broadcast messages of encouragement, speaking of a new time and how it was for the good of everyone. They moved forward without questioning, and one by one they received the mark. I saw no pain, no resistance, only acceptance. It was a cold, efficient process. Some smiled, relieved to finally be part of the system, while others appeared apathetic, as if they no longer had a choice. What shocked me was that I saw some people who once called themselves believers there. Men and women who had once professed faith now bowed their heads and accepted the seal without hesitation. And I understood. The persecution, the isolation, the fear, all of it had been planned to break their resistance. Many had initially resisted, but hunger, the loss of loved ones, despair, all of it led them to yield. Then I saw another group, much smaller, people who had fled to the margins of society, refusing to bow to the system. They lived hidden, persecuted, but they retained something that others had lost: faith. They had no power, no influence, but they possessed something invisible that sustained them. I witnessed striking scenes. I saw those who had no food being fed in inexplicable ways. I saw the injured healed solely by prayer. It wasn't magic, it wasn't a trick. It was real. But I also saw the pain they endured. They were hunted, denounced, treated like criminals. The world had been convinced that they were a threat, that they were dangerous radicals, when in reality, all they did was refuse to betray their own soul. I saw one of these hidden communities, a small group gathered in a dense forest. They had almost nothing, but they shared everything. They were weak, thin, visibly exhausted, yet something in their eyes was different. They were not afraid. I saw a woman holding her small child, whispering prayers as the boy slept. A man broke the last piece of bread and shared it with the others without complaint, without hesitation. They trusted, even in the face of hunger, even knowing that at any moment they could be found. And then, something happened that made me hold my breath. A group of soldiers entered the forest, rifles in hand, searching the area. The group gathered, held each other's hands, and began to pray. I saw their faith become almost tangible, like an invisible wall around them. The soldiers passed very close, looked in their direction, but it was as if they couldn't see them, as if something prevented them from seeing what was right before their eyes. Jesus by my side only looked at me, and in that instant, I understood what he wanted me to see. That group was not surviving by their own merit. They were being sustained. God was still in control, even when everything seemed lost. But I also understood that not everyone would have that fate. The vision changed again, and I was taken to a dark, cold place. It was a sort of makeshift tribunal, where people were brought and forced to choose. Either they accepted the mark and were reintegrated into society, or they refused and faced the consequences. I saw mothers separated from their children, men taken away without explanation, young people trembling with fear. But I also saw those who remained steadfast, who looked into the eyes of their judges and said without hesitation, "No." What happened to them afterward I did not want to see, but I already knew. My heart tightened as I watched the scene before me. The world had reached a point where believing in God, simply believing, was considered an affront. It was no longer just a matter of survival, but of identity. I saw people being taken into closed rooms where they were confronted with an impossible choice. Some cried, others screamed, trying to argue, trying to explain that they were not enemies. But that no longer mattered. The system wanted no explanations. It wanted submission, and those who did not yield disappeared. The most frightening part was how everything happened with mechanical coldness. There was no anger on the faces of the executioners, only indifference. It was as if they believed they were doing what was right, as if eliminating those who resisted was just another routine procedure. My gaze turned to Jesus, seeking answers, trying to understand how such a thing could happen. But he did not seem surprised. He just looked at me with a mix of sadness and resolve, and made me understand, without words, that all this had been foreseen. The road has always been narrow, was what I felt in his eyes. It wasn't just hard times that were coming. It was the ultimate test of faith. There would be no more half measures, no more superficial beliefs. Each person would have to decide absolutely to whom they belonged. Then, I was taken to another scene. I saw crowded churches, but they were no longer the same. Pastors spoke of love and acceptance, but they never mentioned sacrifice, repentance, or a genuine commitment to God. People listened, applauded, left comforted, but empty. Faith had been transformed into something convenient, molded to fit the new world. I looked around and saw that these churches, although full, were no longer houses of God. They were stages for distraction, where people went merely to feel good, to find a spirituality that required neither renunciation nor commitment. Everything was diluted, adapted so as not to disturb anyone. But when I looked beyond appearances, I saw something even more disturbing. Those congregations were being monitored, controlled. The sermons were carefully filtered so that no one would say anything that might awaken the people. Any pastor who tried to warn about what was truly happening disappeared, replaced by someone more moderate, someone who followed the new guidelines. Faith had been domesticated. Christianity as we knew it no longer existed in public spaces. Only those who hid, those who had refused the mark, kept the truth alive, even at the risk of death. Then I saw another scene. This time, it was the big cities, completely transformed. Everything was interconnected, automated, made to function perfectly. But that perfection came at a price. Every citizen was monitored in real time. No transaction happened without going through the system. No movement was made without being recorded. I saw how those who tried to live outside of it were blocked, their accounts frozen, their accesses denied. It didn't matter if they had money saved, property, or skills. If they weren't in the system, it was as if they didn't exist. And little by little, society accepted this new reality without question. For them, it was easier to believe that all of this was for the common good than to face the truth. They were being imprisoned without realizing it. While I observed all this, one detail caught my attention. The people who had accepted the mark seemed calm, but it was an artificial calm. There was something in them that seemed dimmed, as if their own will had been drained. as if they had lost something essential. And then I understood the true meaning of that mark. It wasn't just a system of control. It was a voluntary renunciation of the soul. Accepting the mark wasn't merely an economic or social choice. It was a pact. Those who received it gave away more than their freedom. They gave away their identity, their connection with God. That's why they seemed empty, why they appeared incapable of perceiving what was happening around them. They were no longer masters of themselves. Jesus remained by my side as this truth unfolded before me. No words were necessary. I understood. The world had been led to this point for a long time, subtly, little by little, until finally the moment arrived when no one could escape the final decision. The choice has always been there, was what I felt from him. And in that moment I saw the difference between those who had yielded and those who had resisted. Those who accepted the mark possessed all the material guarantees that the system could offer, but they had lost something infinitely greater. And those who resisted, they suffered. They were persecuted. They went through hunger and fear. But within them there was something that the others no longer had, a light that no force in this world could extinguish. My vision continued to change, and then I saw something that made me shudder. Time had passed, and the world was now completely different. The system was already consolidated. The persecution of those who resisted had intensified, and those who remained faithful were being hunted like never before. I saw lines of people being taken to trial, but these were not ordinary trials. There were no lawyers, no defense, just one simple question. Do you accept the mark? Those who said yes were released. Those who said no never returned home. I saw people I knew had been believers for years hesitate in that final moment. Some cried, pleaded, but eventually yielded. Others closed their eyes, murmured a final prayer, and accepted their fate. And then I realized something that took my breath away. Jesus was not there with those who chose the mark. He only observed, but his presence did not accompany them when they yielded. The pain I felt at that moment was indescribable, not because I saw physical suffering, but because I witnessed something far worse. The final separation. Those who denied God at that instant were making an irreversible decision. There was no turning back. There was no second chance. I saw a man fall to his knees, clutching his face as an officer brought a scanner close to his skin. He murmured something, and I could hear, "Forgive me, Lord." But when the mark was applied, he simply stood up and moved on, as if nothing had happened. Something inside him had died. His struggle ended right there, and I understood. It wasn't just a symbol. It was the definitive surrender of the soul. Before I could process it all, I was taken to another scene. This time, I saw the few who remained, those who refused the mark until the end. There were not many. They were hidden in remote places, caves, forests, abandoned ruins. Some were injured, others went hungry, but they remained steadfast. They had nothing more of this world, but they had something that no one could steal: unshakable faith. I saw a small group gathered around a campfire, holding hands and praying. They knew they didn't have much time. They knew they would be found. But I witnessed something extraordinary happen. In the midst of that despair, the presence of God descended upon them in a way I had never seen before. It was as if the very heavens embraced them. I saw their faces light up, not with fear, but with a joy that made no sense in the situation they were in. Then, they began to sing. It wasn't a lamentation, but a song of victory. I felt it within me. They were not losing. The world saw them as defeated, but in reality, they were the only ones truly free. What I saw next was terrible. I saw soldiers arriving. I saw weapons raised. I saw their end. But I also saw something I will never forget. Before they could be touched, before the pain could reach them, a brightness took over the place. And then they were no longer there. Their bodies remained, but they were not. I saw what no one else could see. God took them. That moment was not a defeat. It was the passage to something much greater. They had triumphed. The scene vanished before my eyes, and suddenly, I was back where it all began. The brightness around me intensified, and I knew that my experience was coming to an end. My heart was still racing with everything I had witnessed. It wasn't just a vision. It wasn't merely a warning. I knew it was real. It was going to happen. I looked at Jesus. And this time, the sadness in his gaze was not only for what was to come, but for the choice that each one would have to make. You must tell the world. His words resonated within me like an eternal echo. I didn't know how I would do it. I didn't know if anyone would believe me, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. I felt a strong tug as if I were being pulled back, and then everything went dark. The deep silence returned, and for a moment I was afraid I would never return. But then, I heard voices, confused, hurried sounds. My vision was blurry, and I felt something pressing against my chest. My body felt heavy, strange, as if I had been torn away from a place to which I no longer belonged. It was then that I realized I was back. I heard shouts, saw unfamiliar faces around me. "She's back, my God, she's back!" Someone cried near me. My mind took a while to process, but then the words made sense. I had died. For 17 minutes I was not in this world, and now, against all logic, I was alive again. The shock of being back was so great that, for a few seconds, I couldn't speak. My body trembled. My mind desperately tried to understand what had happened. The people around me spoke to me, touched me, but it was as if my soul were still caught between two worlds. I knew what I had seen. I knew it was real, but how could I explain? How could I say that I had been in the presence of Jesus, that he had shown me the future, that he had revealed what was to come? Who would believe me? Tears streamed down my face without my even noticing. It was then that I looked to the side and saw the doctor who had tried to revive me. His look was one of pure astonishment. "This is not possible," he murmured. "You were dead." In that moment, I knew I would never be the same again. It didn't matter whether people believed me or not. I had a mission. I had received something much greater than just a second chance at life. It was a responsibility. Every detail of what I had seen was etched into me as if it had been branded in fire. I closed my eyes and tried to take a deep breath, but everything inside me screamed that I could no longer remain silent. I saw what is coming. I saw what the world is not prepared to face. I saw the final choice that everyone will have to make. And above all, I saw that the only thing that will sustain those who refuse to bow to the system will be true faith. In the days that followed, I tried to find words to explain what I had experienced, but everything seemed insufficient. How do you describe something that doesn't belong to this world? How do you convince people that what I saw was not a dream, not a delirium, but a revelation? I looked around and realized that everything seemed to go on as usual, as if nothing were about to happen. But I knew the truth. Every news report on television, every subtle change in global policies, now made sense. The world was heading toward what had been shown to me, and most people didn't even notice. Many times I wanted to close my eyes and pretend that none of it had happened. It would have been easier to go back to my old life, but something inside me wouldn't allow it. The nights were the worst. I would wake up with a start, my heart racing, feeling as if I were still there, facing the visions that Jesus had shown me. His voice echoed in my mind, "You must tell the world." But to whom? Who would listen? Who would believe? It was then that I understood something essential. My mission was not to convince anyone. My mission was to bear witness, to share the truth, regardless of how people reacted. Some would laugh, others would ignore, but there would be those who understood, those who would feel the same chill down their spine that I felt upon waking. And to them, to those who still have eyes to see and ears to listen, my message is clear. Do not be deceived. The time of choice is coming. Since that day, everything within me has changed. I no longer see the world the same way. What once seemed distant, almost impossible, now I know is only a matter of time. Technology, governments, the constant crises, everything is preparing the ground for what has been shown to me. I see signs everywhere, but the truth is that most people don't want to listen. They prefer to believe that everything will continue as it always has, that the world will keep spinning without major changes. It's more comfortable that way, but I know that when the time comes, there will be no more middle ground. I saw what happens to those who choose convenience over faith, and I saw what awaits those who remain steadfast, even in the face of persecution. I do not expect everyone to believe me. I know many will doubt, will call it imagination, delirium. But for those who feel deep in their souls that something is wrong with the world, that something is approaching, I say, be prepared. I'm not talking about stockpiling food nor about fleeing to some isolated place. The most important preparation is not physical but spiritual. The connection with God will be the only thing that can sustain those who refuse to bow. Many will be deceived, swept along by the false sense of security that the system will offer. But those who see beyond appearances will know the truth, and when the moment comes, they will have to choose which side they are on. I do not know why I was chosen to see this. I am no one special. I am not better than anyone. But for some reason, God allowed me to see what is to come, and now that truth weighs on me every day. I wonder how many would be prepared if it all began tomorrow. How many truly understand what it means to remain faithful, even when everything is against you? The world won't realize until it's too late. First will come the promise of peace, of unity, of a new time for humanity. But that peace will come at a price, and those who do not wish to pay it will be considered enemies. I know many think they would never make that wrong choice, but when hunger comes, when fear becomes real, when losing everything is the only alternative, will they still be so sure of their faith? I share this not to scare, but to warn, to remind you that the choice will not be made in a single day but is being built now, in the small moments, in the little concessions. The mark will not be imposed by force. It will be accepted willingly by the majority, because it will seem like the only solution. But for those who want to remain faithful, I say, strengthen yourselves now. Seek God now, because when all of this begins, there will be no time for doubts. I do not know exactly when this will happen. I do not know how much time we have, but I know it is coming. And when the world finally realizes it, perhaps it will already be too late.